The 30th annual Alaska Native Art Auction, celebrating Indigenous artists and voices, takes place Saturday, March 21st at the Hotel Captain Cook in Anchorage. Information available at knba.org. The Alaska Native Art Auction Gala is March 21st, 2026 in Anchorage, Alaska. Donate artwork by February 27th, 2026 and be eligible to win $500. Help sustain Indigenous-led media, including National Native News. Donor forms and details are found at knba.org.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Several species of birds closely connected to Native Hawaiian culture are in danger of disappearing forever. There were once more than 50 species of the strikingly colorful honey creepers. Now only 17 species remain, and they are rapidly diminishing. One of the main threats is a type of avian malaria. Native Hawaiians are part of an effort to try and save the birds that are an important part of traditional ceremonies and stories. We'll hear about these conservation efforts right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi says she's willing to help a northern Wisconsin town get reimbursed for money it paid to access roads. As Danielle Kading reports, the town of Lac du Flambeau made payments to the Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, for access to 4 disputed roads.
3 years ago, the Lac du Flambeau tribe barricaded 4 roads after negotiations failed over expired easements on roads crossing tribal lands. While roads later reopened, the town paid the tribe to maintain access. In a House Judiciary Committee hearing this month, Wisconsin Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany called the payments extortion.
They ultimately got $600,000 from the town of Lac du Flambeau.
In the hearing, Tiffany asked Bondi if she would seek compensation for the town in the long-standing feud. Bondi had this to say.
We would more than welcome working with you.
The tribe said the payments weren't extortion. Lac du Flambeau tribal president John Johnson Sr. says Tiffany's statements were false and a direct attack on tribal sovereignty and treaty rights. The tribe says it remains committed to working with local, state, and federal officials to resolve road access issues in a way that respects residents' safety and laws governing Indian lands. For National Native News, I'm Danielle Kading.
The Arctic continues to warm faster than other parts of the world and is experiencing record high temperatures and record low levels of sea ice. That's according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which released a report card for the region in December. As the Alaska Desk's Ayolna Knighton reports, those findings directly affect Indigenous communities.
The Arctic Report Card has been documenting changes in snow and sea ice cover, as well as air and ocean temperatures in the northern part of the globe for the past 20 years. It has shown that in that time, the Arctic's annual temperature has increased at more than double the global rate of temperature changes. Hannah Marie Ladd is the director of Indigenous Sentinels Network.
These changes cascade directly into people's lives, affecting fisheries, coastal safety, and subsistence harvests. We are no longer just documenting warming. We are witnessing an entire marine ecosystem, which is tied to our economies and culture, transform within a single generation.
The report highlights an emerging phenomenon called rusting rivers. That's when permafrost thaw causes groundwater to seep deeper and interact with mineral deposits, which likely turns some streams and rivers to a rusty orange color. Abigail Pruitt says that in Alaska, over 200 streams turned orange in recent years.
Within Kobuk Valley National Park, we observed the complete loss of juvenile Dolly Varden and slimy sculpin in a tributary to the Akillik River when it turned orange. Beyond the effects on fish, rusting rivers may impact drinking water supplies to rural communities as well.
The report highlights how Indigenous communities have been observing the changes in the environment and wildlife and collaborating with scientists to better understand those changes. Ladd, with the Indigenous Sentinels Network, describes one example of such work. St. Paul residents collect samples of harvested traditional foods, like seabirds, marine mammals, and halibut. Those samples are tested in a tribally owned lab and analyzed for contaminants like mercury.
Indigenous leadership, local workforce development, and community-driven observing are not optional. They are essential to understanding the Arctic that we have today and preparing for the Arctic we are moving into.
In response to your question about how federal cuts to climate science might affect the future of the Arctic Report Card, NOAA officials said that they will continue their efforts to observe the changing environment. In Anchorage, I'm Alona Naiden.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Hear that? Tribal college faculty do so much, one can't say it all here. Nothing but respect. Visit mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network. Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The scarlet honey creeper, whose feathers were worn traditionally by Native Hawaiian chiefs and warriors, is under threat, like many of the native bird species in Hawaii. The primary threat is a mosquito-borne avian malaria. Scientists estimate there were originally over 50 species of honey creepers prior to European contact. Now, that number has dwindled to just 17 species. In 2023, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service declared 8 Hawaiian bird species extinct. Some were honey creepers. Scientists are working to address the troubling trend with mosquito control, but not everyone is on board. Today on our show, we'll hear from Native Hawaiian conservationists working to keep Hawaii's birds alive. And later in the hour, we'll hear about opposition to a proposed telescope construction project by the U.S. Air Force on a summit sacred to Native Hawaiians. Share your comments or questions. Call us at 1-800-996-2848. That number's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have 3 guests joining us now from Hawaii. In Hilo, we have Ben Cacho. He is the Indigenous Communications and Outreach Specialist for the American Bird Conservancy and Outreach Lead for Birds Not Mosquitoes. He is Native Hawaiian. Ben, good morning and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hi, good morning. Aloha kakayaka.
From the island of Hawaii, we have Brett Mossman. He is the Director of Birds of Hawaii, past, present. He is also Native Hawaiian. Brett, good morning to you as well. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sean. Yeah, thank you for having me.
And joining us from Maui is Keoki Kanaka-Okai. He is the Natural Resource Manager for the Nature Conservancy Maui Terrestrial Program and co-lead of the Nature Conservancy Native Network. He is Native Hawaiian and Athabascan. Keoki, good morning to you also. Welcome to Native America Calling.
Aloha nui kako. Mahalo for having me.
It's great to have all 3 of you on the show. Ben, I'm going to begin with you. The American Bird Conservancy has referred to Hawaii as the bird extinction capital of the world. Geez, those are really harsh words to read out loud. How severe is the loss of native bird species where you are?
You know, for Hawaii and being a highlight of American Bird Conservancy is a huge thing, being that American Bird Conservancy is in the main states and focusing on Hawaii, where we are seeing such tragic loss and disappearance of birds, is really our big focus and efforts. Is we are realizing extinction is a real thing. It's no longer just a talk about dinosaurs. It's a talk about existence and perseverance for our native birds here in Hawaii.
Now, climate change and habitat loss, those have both contributed to these population declines in native birds we're talking about today, but the primary driver is avian malaria. What can you tell us about this disease?
You know, avian malaria was introduced in the in the 1890s or so. And so when the shipping whaling ships came to Hawaii and landed here, this bodies of water had mosquito larvae. They released onto the landscape. And since then, we've had introductions of mosquitoes, and now we have over 8 different species of mosquitoes in Hawaii. And this one particular mosquito, the southern house mosquito, is pretty much the pinpoint of avian malaria spreading in our forest, and the reason why Birds Not Mosquitoes, the program, the multi-agency partnership is existing and working to suppress the mosquitoes populations for avian malaria purposes for the time being.
Now, native birds like honey creepers are integral in Native Hawaiian traditional stories, and their feathers were once included with ceremonies. What more can you tell us about the cultural importance of some of these threatened birds?
You know, I think a lot of us historically Google, we can look up these amazing facts about the featherwork of our chiefs, of our chiefess, and there are many uses of the feathers, but what really stands out to me is the ability of our kiamanu, our bird caretakers, the capturers, the people who actually were harvesting and working with, coexisting with our birds in the forest, and the many lessons that was taught to them because of their ability to engage with Aina, our land. Birds are far more than just feathers. They're pollinators, they're seed carriers, they're living family members that live in the forest. And you know, when we see them disappear, the forest weakens, the piece of our culture is disappearing. And so again, I just emphasize, you know, extinction is here. It's not a biological loss only, it's also a cultural loss when we see the disappearance of our native birds.
Ben, one of your favorite birds is also endangered, and it is part of a cultural story. Can you tell our listeners more about it?
Oh, so I do have a favorite bird. I'm often asked by kids what my favorite bird is, and mine's is naturally going to be the Hawaii elepaio, our small flycatcher here on Hawaii Island. And it's really known for its bold personality, its curiosity. And my connection comes partly from a children's book called the Naughty Elepaio. And as a kid, I kind of saw myself in this story. I've been adventurous. I'm a little kolohe, a little bit naughty, and I'm always pushing boundaries. And even though the story gives you a lesson, you know, we all have these these little children's stories that teach us, you know, when you treat others the way you want to be treated. In some sense, I kind of looked at it and I kind of thought in the perspective of Elepaio was, you never know what will happen until you try. And even though this little bird got in trouble from the person he caused an issue with, it was more of the idea that he did something and was curious and took action. And it's the same way I see science and conservation. Progress doesn't come from standing still. It comes from curiosity, action, and learning through experience. In the forest, every observation, every restoration effort, every new idea teaches us something new. And sometimes it never goes as planned. And that's really how my life perspective is I'll go with the flow and I'll figure it out. And that's the Elepaio in some sense.
Well, for sure, Ben. I mean, you describe the flycatcher as having a bold personality, being curious. Sounds a lot like you, brother. Let's talk more about this avian malaria. It's being combated through mosquito control. And in this case, scientists are using mosquitoes to fight other mosquitoes. How does this all work, Ben?
Yeah, so Birds Not Mosquitoes is a multi-agency partnership originally working to protect the native Hawaiian honey creepers from extinction. The main focus of this is looking at suppressing the population of southern house mosquitoes. We're using a technique called incompatible insect technique, for short, IIT, works best for me in my brain. Or in other ways, we call it a mosquito birth control. It doesn't genetically modify any of the mosquitoes. It's a Wolbachia or a mosquito that is created with the intention to suppress its female counterparts. So we are using male mosquitoes that don't bite us, which many people in Hawaii will relate to. Mosquitoes are everywhere. We're always bitten. We're releasing males, and males do not bite, and they're only pollinators carrying this Wolbachia, and their only job is to find females, mate with them, make them incompatible, and ultimately, over time, we will be able to suppress the mosquito population for this species, and hopefully we can save the birds from further harm by combating avian malaria.
Now, there is some pushback from some folks about this method of mosquito control. What are the concerns you have to answer to with this?
So a lot of times the big pushback comes from misunderstanding or misinformation. Wolbachia is a very foreign word for many. We don't use this in common conversations. And so when we hear something unfamiliar, a lot of our red flags, our eyes get very big. And so I just like to emphasize that Wolbachia is a natural occurring bacteria. It's already present in Hawaii. 60% of all insect species, including mosquitoes, butterflies, fruit flies, and even our native VQ bug, have Wolbachia. It's not harmful for any of us humans, to fish, other birds, or pets. It only lives within arthropods. And Wolbachia is maternally transmitted. So it's passed from the mother, to the offspring, not via bites or being bitten. So I just emphasize again, we're only dropping male mosquitoes. And the big lesson for all of us to learn, to understand in Hawaii is male mosquitoes do not bite. So this project is purely focused on just suppressing mosquito species that have been causing harm to our forests within the past decade. And although we may not be able to solve it immediately, I will always emphasize the idea that something that's been happening over a decade can't be fixed within a few years. It's going to take time. We're going to learn what's best for it, and we're always going to put the best interests of our forest, our community, and ultimately the birds first.
We're speaking with Ben Cacho, the Indigenous Communications and Outreach Specialist for the American Bird Conservancy and Outreach Lead for Birds Not Mosquitoes. He is kicking off our conversation today on Native America Calling. He is in Hilo, and we have other guests on the show as well. We're going to talk more about some of these bird conservation efforts with regard to endangered species in Hawaii. 17 species right now that we are dealing with specifically, and we'll continue this conversation on the other side of this short break. Listeners who would like to join our conversation today, maybe you have thoughts with regard to endangered species, specifically birds, or perhaps different types of conservation efforts that might work. Maybe you've been involved in a similar type of project in your community, or you're familiar with one. We'd like to hear from you. You can always share your perspective, share your insights, or you might just have a question. You'd like to learn a little bit more about how this all works with regard to combating these mosquitoes that we just heard Ben talk about. You can call as well, 1-800-99-NATIVE. And our social media platforms, as always, those are open to our listeners as well. Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky Threads. And there's always our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back and continue this conversation. Carrie Morin's latest album, Pocket of Time, is a collection of memories and everyday moments from life on the Crow Reservation in Montana. Fans of the Crow and Assiniboine singer-songwriter can expect more of Morin's heartfelt storytelling and mellow fingerstyle guitar work. Carrie Morin joins us as one of the featured artists on our monthly Native playlist on the next Native America Calling.
Leave it all behind.
Who protects Indian country? Amerant does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerant helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerant is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerant.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We're speaking now with Native Hawaiian conservationists about saving Hawaii's birds from extinction. If you would like to add a comment or a question to this conversation, you can do so. Call 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. 996-2848. You can also comment on our website and social media pages. Our next guest, Brett Mossman, is the Director of Birds of Hawaii, past present. He joins us now from the island of Hawaii. Brett, you oversee research projects and various bird conservation efforts. Is the current work being done in Hawaii enough to reverse these trends we're learning about today?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think, for certain species, we definitely have the tools that we need to bring them back from the brink. The technology is there, the tools are there, and the resources are there. But overall, unfortunately, Hawaiian birds really struggle with getting the resources that they need to recover. So I think, especially for our honey creepers, we're missing a lot of the key tools that we need in order to save them.
Tell us more about these key tools that you need. What would it take to secure them?
Yes, unfortunately, kind of the biggest thing is funding. Hawaiian birds traditionally have received much less restoration funding than birds on the continent. So, for instance, between the 1990s and the early 2000s, Native Hawaiian birds, even though they represented about a third of the total listed birds in the United States, received less than 4% of the federal recovery funding. So I think that's kind of the biggest issue that we're experiencing, is that there's just not enough resources to implement the tools that already exist to save these birds. We have mosquito control options, we have predator control options, we have the ability to restore habitat, but we just can't afford to implement those actions.
Brett, about what does it cost to implement some of these programs? For example, the mosquito birth control program that we heard Ben talk about.
It can be quite expensive. So, like, for instance, each one of the male mosquitoes that is being released is about 15 cents, and we need to release a very large number of these mosquitoes, so the cost can add up very quickly. Similarly, with like predator control, the biggest expense is purchasing the traps and other things that we need to control the invasive mammals, particularly mongoose and rats. And depending on the type of trap, those can range from a few dollars to several $100s, depending on the design and where it's coming from. And then habitat restoration, we need to be able to collect seeds, grow out the plants, so we need to be able to purchase soil and pots and then employ people to go out and plant those trees. So all of those things kind of add up, and it can so we're doing the best with what we have. Thousands of trees are being planted every year, and we're trying to use a lot of volunteers and other action to try to implement these projects. I really take a lot of inspiration from Aotearoa, New Zealand, where they're doing a lot of like community-run predator control. Entire communities are running traps in their neighborhoods to protect their manure, their birds. And so I think we can learn a lot from that to try to make more from less. But yeah, overall, it can be quite costly to implement conservation action.
Brett, there's new concern about a species of forest bird that may be extinct. What do we know about this?
Yeah, so there's two species that we're primarily concerned about right now. One is the akikiki, and the other is the akekee. Both of these species are endemic to Kauai, so they're only found on the island of Kauai. And the akikiki, we knew of at least one wild individual left. Her name was Pakele. She's an 8-year-old female, and she's been the last of her species in the wild that we've seen. And she was last seen in August. So we're really concerned that, she might not be out there anymore. But there's a team going out, hopefully this next month, to try to relocate her, as well as to try to locate the last few remaining akekee on Kauai. But there's been an unprecedented level of mosquitoes in the forest bird habitat this year, and so we've just seen a precipitous decline of all of the forest birds on Kauai, except for the elepaio and puaiohi, which are two species that are resistant to malaria, but the honey creepers, unfortunately, have really been suffering.
And if you're able to locate that bird that you just mentioned, with just a few left, how are you able to save a bird like that when it's just almost gone like this?
Yeah, so in the case of the akikiki, we're very fortunate that there is a captive population
So from about 2016 to the 2020s, a handful of eggs and birds were brought into captivity. And so now the population is roughly about 50 individuals between two facilities on Maui and on Hawaii Island. And so that's one way that, that species has been protected. And then hopefully, we're going to try to implement some additional conservation measures for that species and maybe some others, where we've been talking about potentially translocating or introducing akikiki to places on Hawaii Island, where there's a lot more habitat that's free of avian malaria, and they might be able to reproduce more successfully in a more wild habitat. And then for Akike'e, the big one is just really trying hard to get the mosquito control implemented on a large enough landscape to be meaningful for that species conservation. So those are kind of the main things we're working on trying to implement to bring these birds back from the brink, because it can be very difficult, but birds have been brought back from very hard circumstances. Going back to Aotearoa, New Zealand, they had the black robin in the Chatham Islands, which was down to just a single female, and now there's several hundred of those birds. So it may seem very dire, but we do have the ability to bring birds back from these very, very precarious situations.
Brett, some of your work has included traveling across Europe, taking photos of Hawaiian birds that are in collections in museums there. That's really interesting. Can you talk more about that work and how it ties into your overall mission with the conservation of birds?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of it is, trying to restore the identity of those individual birds, because a lot of these specimens have been, kind of stored away in drawers in museums for 150 years, and maybe a handful of people have ever seen them, and so one of the big inspirations for that project is to kind of give these birds back their identity, because they all are individuals, and for us as Kanaka, they are family, they are our kupuna, our elders, and so it just seems very hard to have them so far away from us. And so the other big inspiration for the project is digitally repatriating them, bringing them home through the images that we are able to get, and also just getting more familiar with these species. A lot of times, like, if you look them up, you'll find one picture or one drawing. Now I'm creating this library where you can see every single individual of these species, that we've lost, that were lost 100 years ago. And so I think just working on finding them, restoring their identity, and then bringing them home in whatever capacity I can is kind of the big goals for that project. And then also, it just helps kind of reconnect people to these birds that we've lost. I think that's one of the biggest issues that we face in Hawaii is there's a large barrier to entry to connecting with our manu, because they live so far away from people, they're hard to access. And so through these digital media, you can bring these birds back into people's lives every single day.
All right, thank you. Brett Mossman joining us. He is the director of Birds of Hawaii, past, present. 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have the phone lines open for any listeners who would like to join this conversation. Give us a call, ask a question, share a perspective with regard to bird conservation. Maybe you have similar types of projects where you live and you'd like to share some of that information. You can do so. 1-800-996-2848. Let's talk a little bit more about the predator control issue with regard to bird conservation efforts in Hawaii. And to do that, we have Keoki Kanaka-Okai on the show today. He joins us now from Maui, where he is the Nature Resource Manager for the Nature Conservancy Maui Terrestrial Program, among other titles. And Keoki, predator control, what are the primary predators that you're dealing with, and how well received is this method of conservation?
Yeah, that is very, very important. It's been difficult, but primarily we're dealing with rats, cats, and mongoose. Hawaii didn't have any native land mammals, so our native species haven't evolved to have the effective mechanism onto threats. And so controlling those, and especially controlling.
Okay, Keoki, I'm sorry, do me a favor. We're going to work on your phone line just a little bit. It's a little bit rough. I'm going to go ahead and go back to Brett while we get you squared away. We'll take care of this here. Brett, what can you tell us with regard to, we just heard from Keoki, rats and mongoose. Those are the primary predators you're dealing with.
Yeah, rats, cats, and mongoose. So they all like Keoki was saying. Hawaii didn't have any native land mammals, and so most of our native birds actually don't have any behavioral defenses against those predators. A lot of our native species will freeze or they won't run away when a mammal is coming after them because they have all evolved with avian predators. And so when you have an animal that hunts primarily by scent, which is most mammals, our birds are really susceptible. And one of the other really unique things about the honey creepers is they actually have this smell. Most birds have very little smell on incontinence because they've been predated by mammals. But our birds, they kind of smell like a musty library book. If you open an old book, it kind of has that musty smell. And so mammals are able to find them very easily, and they'll eat their eggs, young, and even the adult birds.
That's really, really fascinating to hear you describe it like that. Brett, reading the statistics and just some of the articles that I were sent to me with regard to preparing for this show, and I'm sorry, Brett, I'm going to go ahead and throw this question back to Keoki because we have him back on the line. And I mean, Keoki, these population rates, they seem to be declining at such a rapid rate. Do you ever feel like maybe some of this work is almost beyond hope? Do you ever get discouraged with regard to what the prospects look like?
That's a wonderful question. I think it's something that all of us conservationists deal with. But I think to do this, you have to be a little bit of an optimist, because if we didn't believe there was hope for our ecosystems and native species, none of us would be doing this work. We're not in it for the money. It's a difficult, risking job that most of us do.
Let's talk about climate change and how that contributes to the declines in these bird species we're talking about, because I'm thinking specifically with regard to these mosquitoes and warming temperatures. That's got to be an issue there.
Absolutely. These warming temperatures tend to drive mosquitoes higher up the mountain. So historically, we've had these really nice cold areas where it was just inhospitable for mosquitoes. But now with changing weather patterns, we're seeing these mosquito populations blow higher and higher up the mountains. We've already displaced so much of our native forest bird habitat by building and putting our houses down in the lowlands that they really only exist in these upper refugia. But with climate changing, we're seeing that refugia shrink. And in addition to that, they can't just keep going higher because eventually you reach this barren rock landscape. And so they need to have forests to be able to survive and persist.
Okay. Keoki, how about a little bit of the history here? Because I know that there were some debates at one point with regard to just the beginning of some of these extinction issues we're talking about today. At one point, there was an attempt to blame indigenous people, Native Hawaiians, for their involvement years and years ago. We're talking centuries ago. And then there's also a lot of research out there, data that suggests, no, these issues really started more with the advent and arrival of Europeans and colonizers. What's your thought here? What can you share with our listeners?
Absolutely. I think our Native Hawaiians, we relate to these species. They are our living ancestors, and we care for them deeply. And so historically, when bird catchers worked with our native birds, they weren't killing them. They were capturing them and selectively picking out individual feathers and releasing them. We understood that when they thrive, we thrive. And so a lot of work recently has shown and validated that it was indeed these invasive introduced pests that came through colonialism.
Got it. Brett Mossman, what are your thoughts here? What can you add to this issue with regard to the beginnings of some of these extinction problems we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times people will see a lot of the feather work or the other creations that were made by Kanaka, and all they can see is like the negative side, that the feathers were taken from the birds. But I think what needs to be realized too is that, at the time that most of those ahu'ula, those feather capes were made, the estimated populations for some of these birds, like the EEV, the scarlet honeycreeper that you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, were in the tens of millions. So even if people collected the feathers, they wouldn't have had much of an impact on the population, particularly when, these feathers were collected over sometimes entire lifetimes, multiple lifetimes, and from an entire ahupua'a or even entire moku, the entire island. And if anything, what it speaks to is the true importance of the ahupua'a land management system, which was the traditional means of managing lands by Hawaiians. The only way you could possibly make something like an ahu'ula is if the forest, if the ahupua'a, if the island was healthy. And clearly at the time, the island was much healthier then than it is now.
Thanks, Brett. Keoki, back to you. I want to ask you about some of your recruiting efforts, attempting to get more Indigenous people involved in this type of conservation work. How's that coming along?
Oh, thankfully, it's coming along nicely. The face of conservation in Hawaii has changed quite a bit. Some of the barriers that have prevented our native populations from getting into these science fields are coming down with the help of programs like Pupu Hawaii, who administered AmeriCorps internships. And a large part of what I'm trying to do as the co-lead of our Native Network is to advance Indigenous-led conservation across all the different geographies. We realize that it's so important for our communities who've grown in these places and understand these systems to be the stewards of the place. And so reconnecting and getting Hawaiians back in the forest, back in stewardship is a natural fit, and it's a really nice movement that we're part of.
Keoki Kanaka-Okai talking with us today from the island of Maui. He is the Natural Resource Manager for the Nature Conservancy Maui Terrestrial Program. We're learning a lot today about Hawaii's birds, and specifically birds that are facing extinction or dwindling numbers. And we've got the phone lines open still for listeners. Just give us a call at 1-800-996-2848 if you would like to join this conversation, share your insights, share your perspectives, your thoughts, or maybe ask a question. Maybe you'd like to learn a little bit more about the topics we're talking about, how some of these conservation efforts work. If there's a point that maybe we've missed or a question that you have that isn't quite clear, give us a call. We've got folks on the show who can give you answers. 1-800-99-NATIVE. More conversation on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Tribal Development Partners, supporting tribal sovereignty through 105L leasing and essential infrastructure development. Tribal Development Partners will attend RES 2026 in booth 303 and are proud to support this show.
Need an actionable plan to achieve your goals? Kaufman & Associates strengthens Native organizations through culturally grounded strategic planning. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We're going to continue a little bit more with our conversation with Native Hawaiian conservationists about saving Hawaii's birds from extinction. And I want to go back to Ben Cacho. He is in Hilo, where he is the Indigenous Communications and Outreach Specialist for the American Bird Conservancy. And Ben, we heard earlier from the other guests about some of these climate change issues, warming waters, warming air temperatures. And I'm curious to know if you're seeing some of these effects with regard to the mosquito birth control program that you're a part of. And if so, what's the impact?
Yeah, so what this B&M project kind of is focused on is on the island of Maui and Kauai. I think sometimes people across Hawaii, we think it's all across. However, we're only primarily on those two islands. And climate has been a huge part with this project because mosquitoes have reached the very peaks of our mountains. Similar to some of the mountains being named would be the Alakai, and also with the Haleakala, there's mosquitoes in these areas. And so as we see climate change and impact our islands, mosquitoes are traveling higher and higher, making the habitat for birds even smaller and smaller.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Ben, for adding that additional insight here. 1-800-996-2848, the number to call to join today's conversation. We're going to now talk about another issue facing Native Hawaiian communities. Native Hawaiians are voicing opposition to a U.S. Air Force proposal to build 7 additional telescopes atop of the East Maui volcano. The site is considered sacred, and the issue mirrors the opposition to the construction of the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea. To talk about this more, I'd like to now introduce our next guest, Hina Neubel. She is a translator, storyteller, and a kapa maker, and she is Native Hawaiian. Hina, welcome to Native America Calling, and please feel free to further introduce yourself.
Velina me ke aloha, o ke aloha keia, o ka ke ao na ulu e kiko o ana I ka aina e lawe ana ho'i ka ua me ka malu ma kahi e pono ai. Aloha nui kako. I'm Hina Pua Mohala Nuvo, he keiki papa mai au no Waipoli, I ka poli o Haleakala, kukila kila, maka moku puni o Maui nei. Thank you for having me.
Aloha, Hina. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful, beautiful introduction. Really appreciate it. Now, tell us more about this land where the Air Force proposes building more telescopes.
Yeah, Haleakala is our beautiful mountain. It's one of 2 large mountains on our island of Maui. It goes from summit to sea. It's 10,300 feet, and as a mountain system that goes from, again, the ocean all the way to the summit, 360 degrees. It's a living, breathing ancestor who sustains us every day. It's home to one of the most productive watersheds in the world and to the plants and animals that, form the genealogy of life, essentially, that enables us as Hawaiians and all of us as people here on this island to be. And so it's an extremely sacred place for us. In Hawaiian thought, it's the po, or the great generative darkness, that birthed our akua, our deities, who then birthed the land and all of the forms of life in it, and then birthed the people and the chiefs. And then the chiefs, who were considered, earthly manifestations of the divine, kind of shaped and influenced many of our landscapes. And so, there's other gods and goddesses associated with this whole process. And I can talk more about that if you'd like.
I do want you to, but first, Hina, I'm curious to know, why this mountain? Why does the Air Force want telescopes in this specific location?
Well, what they tell us is that the skies above Haleakala are extremely clear. It's a very high elevation mountain. The clarity, the quality of probably penetration of their lasers and their, optical things that they use to look into the celestial space. It's an excellent location, but it isn't the only location. And what we see in the draft environmental impact statement that they put out on January 30th is that they really haven't done meaningful explorations of any other locations. And there are many that would be really good as well, because they say themselves that they're not tracking, this is not for deep space exploration. This is for closer to the Earth monitoring. And so that can actually happen from a range of places, and it doesn't need to happen in our most sacred space. And so the pico, or the summit of the mountain, for us is really, all summit spaces to Hawaiians are sacred, but the pico of our mountain here, Haleakala, is really one of the most sacred places on our island, because pico itself is the umbilicus, right? So just how we're connected to our mothers via our umbilical cord in the womb, the pico of the mountain connects us to our akua, to our deities, and to the celestial space and the highest, energies in our universe. And so for us, it is really one of the most sacred places. And for us, it is not the place that these telescopes should be built.
Now, we talked earlier about the 30-meter telescope, and I know that there were protests in objection to that project. Are you seeing similar types of efforts right now?
Well, yeah, our community is really united in opposition against this project. 89% of testimonies in the most recent public commentary periods were against the telescopes. And actually, those were from the first scoping meetings. during these second phase of scoping meetings, there were 2 community meetings, a total of almost 90 speakers. Only one person came out in support. Our whole council, our county council passed a resolution against the project. Our mayor has spoken out against it, and many Native Hawaiian organizations, including the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And so we see very much from within our community a united opposition. And, we're continuing to sort of build on that energy and to continue to engage with our community on this fight.
Hina, how did you first find out about this East Maui volcano proposal? And I know that the Air Force has agreed to be respectful and be as mindful of Indigenous perspective as possible. But for some folks, that's not enough. Some people just want this project halted, period, right?
Yes, and I actually find it really funny because they'll say that over and over again, yet they'll do nothing that meaningfully shows that to us. So they haven't consulted with any Native Hawaiian organizations. And they'll say, that's what they said about the last telescope. They said, we're going to do our best to mitigate the effects of this. Well, you cannot mitigate the effects of a telescope in a sacred space. You can't mitigate damage in a sacred space. They said they would take ultimate care. They spilled 7,000 gallons or 700 gallons of fuel, of diesel, a fuel that's a combination of a couple of different things. They spilt that through their own operational errors at the summit of the mountain and have failed to fully clean that up, yet want to ask for another space to do more damage. And so it's really, for us, it's untenable. They haven't been good stewards. And this is a history stretching back since really the overthrow of our kingdom in 1893. And so, they are illegally occupying our country. And since that time, they've continued to make an increasing military presence since that time. And we've continued to resist that for 133 years. So, we're used to this, and we're here to continue to fight for our lands and our waters.
Well, Hina, thinking more about military presence, I mean, it's no secret that Hawaii was the target of the Pearl Harbor bombing that got the U.S. involved in World War II because there was so much military infrastructure on the islands. And is there a risk now? Are people concerned that with building more of this infrastructure, telescopes, for example, in this situation, that Hawaii could again be targeted in the way it was with Pearl Harbor back in the 1940s, especially with the way things are right now with the world and so much conflict and turmoil?
Absolutely. That's a really astute observation, and we have that concern. That's a deep concern of ours. We feel that every single increased military action and infrastructure here only puts a larger target on our back and only does more damage. And it's essentially part of a military-industrial complex that really it doesn't care about human life. It cares about selling weapons, and it cares about maintaining hegemony. And, while it's occupying us here in Hawaii, it's also funding and sending weapons to a genocide in Palestine, and now moving to occupy that country alongside Israel. And, we don't want anything to do with that as Indigenous peoples. We want to see liberation for ourselves and our brothers and sisters in Gaza and the rest of Palestine, and in other places in the world where the American military is imposing, imperialism.
Now, there's also a plant that could be potentially endangered by this telescope project. Can you talk about that?
Yes, the Ahinahina, which is the Haleakala silver sword. It's one of my very favorite plants. And, excuse me, I have a cold. I hope you can hear me okay. It only grows at the top of our mountain and inside the luapele, or the crater. So the summit area and the crater area are the only place that this particular species grows. And it's a magnificent plant. It's got these sharp leaves. It's called a silver sword because its leaves look like swords. And they're faceted, and they're in a rosette that whirls, and the shapes of the leaves, they catch the sun, and then they focus it towards the inner bud in the center where it's growing to keep it warm enough so that it doesn't die, because the temperatures are so extreme at the top of the mountain. And so it's this plant that can survive in this unbelievably intense climate and set of conditions that make it super special to us. And it's called Ahinahina because it's silver like the moonlight, which is a form of the goddess Hina that shines down on these plants every night. And actually, in this draft environmental impact statement, they tried to say that the area where the proposed project area is not critical habitat for the Ahinahina, but as a botanist, I totally disagree. It is less than half a mile from existing Ahinahina populations, and it absolutely is prime Ahinahina real estate. It's where the species likely grew in the past and would continue to grow if the area wasn't constantly disturbed by these incursions.
How often are you able to ascend this summit that we're talking about? It sounds like you're pretty familiar with the terrain and some of the plant life there.
Yeah, Haleakala is a place that I go to probably 1 to 2 times a year, maybe 3 if I'm lucky. And because it's such a special place, it's not somewhere that we go all the time. And so I go there to commemorate certain events. I go there to do certain rituals with other community members, certain ceremonies. And so it's a space for me that we're not meant to be in all the time. And that's why it's part of the Vauakua, or the realm where our deities exist. So when I'm fortunate enough to be able to go for a ceremony during a solstice or an equinox, or perhaps one of our birthdays in my little ohana, my family, we are incredibly grateful, and we approach the mountain and all the spaces at the summit and within the crater with reverence. And we go there to connect again to our akua, to our kupuna, because for us, all the plants and animals that are in this environment, and then all on the flanks of our mountain, which actually on the east side form the amazing watershed that I was talking about, all of that is the kahua that allows us to exist. And so when we go up there, we connect with the akua and the aumakua, and we give thanks for this beautiful place that sustains us. And so, yeah, we don't go often, but when we do, it's very special.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It really does, Hina. We've got a couple of minutes before we have to wrap up. Please explain more. What are the next steps here going forward, and what's the timeline with regard to when these telescopes might go up?
Well, they have a lot of more steps in their process to do. They're nowhere close to starting building, I don't think. And if we have any say as a community, that's certainly not going to happen. So I can't say what their timeline is, but for us, they're telling us that, we have to have all of our comments into them, our in writing comments, by March 16th. And so we're trying to rally our community to write their testimonies in opposition. And we're gathering a lot of information. We're providing resources. We've built a website called protecthaleakala.com, and there we have gathered all sorts of resources for the community, and we're continuing to build that. And that's built on the efforts of folks before us, like Kila Kila o Haleakala, who also have an incredible vaihona, or a big trove of resources on their site for folks who want to learn more about the history of, development on our mountain, about the mountain itself. So we're in a phase of really trying to engage and share information with our community. We each hold valuable pieces of knowledge, and we need to exchange those with each other so that we can strengthen together and stand strong together in opposition of this project, but for our mountain, for the life that exists on it, for our ancestors and our history.
And with that, we've reached the end of our hour. I want to thank our guests who joined us today, Hina Noibel, Brett Mossman, Ben Cacho, and Keoki Kanaka Okai. Please, listeners, join us again tomorrow when we will hear about new albums by Crow musician Carrie Morin and the Anishinaabe-led Canadian indie rock band Status Non-Status. We'll be adding to our native playlist, so be sure and tune in. I'm Sean Spruce. Enjoy the rest of your day. You've been listening to the one, the only, Native America Calling.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, we fight to restore stability, dignity, and justice. Bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions. Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiver-resources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
The 30th Annual Alaska Native Art Auction, celebrating Indigenous artists and voices, takes place Saturday, March 21st. Corporate sponsorship opportunities are available. Information at kmba.org.